All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
A timeless one.
It really is, published way back in 1937. And guess what?
What's that?
It's still a bestseller. Almost a century later, people are still turning to Carnegie for advice.
Makes you wonder why, doesn't it? What is it about this book that keeps resonating?
That's exactly what we're going to explore today. Have you ever, met someone and thought, man, they just get how to connect with people?
Like they've got some secret formula.
Yeah, well, Carnegie might just have cracked that code. And the thing is, he didn't just pull this out of thin air.
Oh, no. This wasn't just him sitting at a desk thinking up nice-sounding advice.
Right. He spent over a year, like a serious research project, digging into biographies. Everyone from Julius Caesar
Talk about going way back.
to Thomas Edison. And then get this.
He didn't stop there, did he?
Nope. He went on to personally interview some of the biggest names of the time. Marconi, Edison again.
The inventor of the radio, right?
Yep. And even President Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Wow, he aimed high.
He was trying to figure out what made these incredibly successful people tick. What were their secrets to building relationships?
So he was like a detective of human connection.
Exactly. And right from the jump, he hits us with this powerful quote from John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon.
One of the wealthiest men in history.
Rockefeller said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the ability to deal with people is as purchasable as sugar or coffee, and I will pay more for that ability than for any other under the sun.
Whoa, that's a statement. He's basically saying people skills are the most valuable commodity there is.
Which makes you think, right, why aren't we spending more time learning these skills?
We dedicate years to school, learning math, science, history. But how much time do we spend on learning how to really connect with people?
It's true. So this deep dive is all about unpacking Carnegie's wisdom and figuring out how we can unlock that potential in ourselves.
I'm ready to unlock some potential.
Okay, let's get into it. Principle number 1. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
Sounds simple enough, but in practice.
Oh, it's way harder than it seems. To illustrate this, Carnegie starts with a story about Al Capone,
Al Capone, the gangster.
the one and only. Now, Capone was responsible for some pretty horrific things, right?
Yeah, definitely not someone you'd associate with kindness.
But get this, Capone actually claimed to have a kind heart.
That's surprising, to say the least.
Right, it's jarring. But what Carnegie's getting at is that we rarely have the full picture of someone's life and motivations, and trying to change people through criticism usually backfires.
Treats more resistance than anything else.
Exactly. There's this great story he tells about a construction site manager who was having trouble getting his workers to wear hard hats.
A classic safety issue.
He tried everything. Yelling, threats, punishments. Nothing worked.
What did he do?
He finally decided to just ask the workers, hey, why aren't you wearing your hard hats?
Makes sense. Get to the root of the problem.
Turns out some of the hats were ill-fitting. Simple as that. So by understanding their perspective, he was able to solve the problem.
Without all the negativity and resentment.
Exactly. And Carnegie doesn't just rely on anecdotes. He brings in some historical examples, too.
Oh, yeah. He connects this to some major events.
Big time. Think about the feud between Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, former president and then president.
Both Republicans, right. But they ended up as rivals.
Their constant criticism of each other split the Republican Party.
Which had huge consequences.
It paved the way for Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, to win the presidency in 1912.
Wow. So their personal conflict had ripple effects on the whole country.
See? Criticism can be seriously destructive.
What other historical examples does he give?
He talks about the Teapot Dome scandal during the Harding administration. A cabinet member was accepting bribes for oil leases.
That's corruption on a whole other level.
The criticism and investigation that followed ruined reputations, eroded public trust.
And some people even end up in jail, right?
It's a mess. And all stemming from this culture of criticism and blame.
So how do we break free from that?
Well, Carnegie has this amazing story about Abraham Lincoln. Always a good source of wisdom.
What did Honest Abe have to say about this?
After the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln was furious with General Meade for not pursuing the retreating Confederate army.
He could have ended the war sooner, right?
Potentially. So Lincoln drafted this scathing letter ripping into Meade. But he never sent it.
Why not?
Because he realized that harshly criticizing Meade wouldn't achieve anything positive. It was better to move forward with understanding, not condemnation.
That's a powerful lesson. Sometimes holding back is the strongest move.
So if criticism is off the table, what's the alternative?
Well, Carnegie's next principle is all about giving honest and sincere appreciation.
Appreciation. Okay, that's a different approach.
It is. And he starts by quoting both Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Everybody likes a compliment,"
Sure enough.
and William James, the psychologist, who called the desire for a feeling of importance the deepest principle in human nature.
Deep stuff.
Carnegie's point is that feeding this heart hunger, as he calls it, is one of the most effective ways to win people over.
But he's not talking about flattery, is he? Because that always feels fake.
Exactly. He's very clear about that. Flattery is insincere and manipulative. This is about recognizing and acknowledging people's genuine strengths and contributions.
I can see the difference.
Mhm.
So it's about tapping into that universal need to feel valued.
Yes. And he gives a funny example from his own life. His father was a farmer who raised prize-winning hogs.
Prize-winning hogs. Okay, this thing I gotta hear.
So even though his father was a tough, practical man, he beamed with pride showing off those ribbons at the county fair.
Oh, that's kind of sweet.
It just shows that everyone, no matter who they are, craves that feeling of importance.
I guess deep down, we all want to feel like we're winning those blue ribbons, huh?
And maybe not for hog raising, but for something.
So how do we apply this in our own lives? I mean, it's easy to compliment someone on a new haircut, but what about in more complex situations?
Well, he uses the example of Charles Schwab, the steel magnate.
Big name in industry.
Schwab was known for motivating his employees. And he had a motto: "I am anxious to praise, but loath to find fault."
He understood that people thrive when they feel appreciated, not criticized.
Exactly. And even Andrew Carnegie himself, Charles Schwab's mentor, was a master of this.
Really. I always pictured him as more of a tough businessman type.
He could be tough, for sure. But he also recognized the power of praise. He was always ready to acknowledge and appreciate his employees' hard work.
So recognizing others' contributions isn't just about being nice. It's a strategic way to build relationships and inspire people.
Right. It's about understanding that everyone has something to offer and that acknowledging those contributions can unlock incredible potential.
I love that. Which actually leads perfectly into Carnegie's third principle. Arouse in the other person an eager want.
Ooh, that one sounds intriguing.
He says, and I love this quote, "The only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it."
It's like a complete mindset shift, and most of us try to convince others to see things our way.
Yeah, we're like, come on, just agree with me already.
But Carnegie's saying that's backwards. We need to start by understanding what they desire, what motivates them.
That's a tough one. It's so much easier to focus on our own wants and needs.
It is, but Carnegie illustrates this beautifully with a story about Ralph Waldo Emerson,
The transcendentalist writer.
the one and only. So Emerson and his son were trying to get a calf into the barn.
Oh no, this sounds like a recipe for disaster.
They pushed, they pulled, they focused solely on their goal of getting that calf inside, but the calf resisted.
Stubborn calf.
It wasn't until the housemaid came along and let the calf suck on her finger while gently leading it that it finally followed.
She appealed to the calf's wants, not her own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She understood what motivated the calf and used that to her advantage.
So it's like we have to figure out what motivates the calf in any situation.
Precisely. Whether it's your kid who doesn't want to go to kindergarten or a client who's hesitant to buy a new product.
You got to find that finger to get them moving.
Exactly. And Carnegie even argues that seemingly selfless acts like giving to charity are rooted in wanting something.
Okay, that's interesting. How so?
Think about it, maybe it's the feeling of making a difference, the social recognition, the tax write-off,
Even charitable acts are driven by some kind of desire.
even subconscious ones. Understanding those underlying wants is key to influencing behavior.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together. Okay, so we've gone from avoiding criticism to appreciating others to understanding their motivations. What's next?
Well, now Carnegie tackles how to become a good conversationalist, and his advice might surprise you. He says the key is to be a good listener.
Really, I feel like we hear that a lot, but what makes Carnegie's take on it different?
Well, he doesn't just say, listen more, and leave it at that. He really dives into the why behind it and gives some really practical tips on how to actually be a better listener.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So, are you ready to ditch the small talk and learn how to have conversations that really connect?
Absolutely. Let's do it. I'm ready to
Ugh.
dish the small talk. Lay it on me. What's the secret to becoming a master conversationalist?
Well, get ready for this, because Carnegie's advice is pretty simple. Be a good listener.
Okay, I told you I've heard that before, right?
Right. But Carnegie really breaks down why it's so important.
So why is it?
Think about it. Most of us are so focused on ourselves, on what we're going to say next, that we don't truly listen.
I'm definitely guilty of that. Sometimes I'm so busy formulating my response in my head that I miss half of what the other person is saying.
It's a common trap. And Carnegie knew this way back then. He even highlights a study done by the New York Telephone Company. They found that the most commonly used word in phone conversations was I.
Wow. That's kind of depressing.
It is. It shows how self-centered our conversations can be. But Carnegie says when we shift that focus and become genuinely interested in the other person, that's when the magic happens.
It's about making the other person feel heard and understood.
Exactly. And it's not just about listening passively. It's about actively engaging, asking questions, and showing genuine curiosity.
I can see how that would make people feel more connected to you. Do you have any examples of people who are really good at this?
Oh, absolutely. Carnegie talks about Theodore Roosevelt, who was known for being incredibly charismatic and connecting with people from all walks of life.
Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider.
The one and only. And you know what his secret was? He made a point of remembering people's names and details about their lives, even the White House staff.
Wow, even the people who might have been considered lowly employees.
Exactly. He treated everyone with respect and genuine interest, and that's what made him so magnetic.
I get it. When someone remembers my name, especially if it's been a while, it makes me feel like they actually care. Like I'm not just another face in the crowd.
Precisely. It's about making people feel seen and valued. And that actually ties into Carnegie's next principle, which is all about the magic of using someone's name.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So just saying someone's name can really make that much of a difference.
Carnegie says it can. He tells this amazing story about Jim Farley, a politician who helped put FDR in the White House.
This is back when political campaigns were a whole different ballgame, right?
Oh, yeah, way before social media and all that. So Farley claimed he could call 50,000 people by their first names.
50,000. No way. I can barely remember the names of people I met yesterday.
I know, right? It seems impossible. But Farley had a system. When he met someone new, he wouldn't just learn their name. He'd also try to learn a few details about them, their family, their business, their interests, even their political opinions.
So he was creating a more complete picture of the person in his mind.
Exactly. And then he'd visualize those details alongside the person's face, almost like creating a mental snapshot.
It's like a memory palace technique, but for people.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating a personalized hook for each person you meet.
So it's not just rote memorization. It's about connecting the name to something meaningful.
Right. And Carnegie shares this story about a guy who used this technique to turn a scowling cafeteria worker into a friendly face, just by remembering her name.
Wow. So that's like superpower.
It kind of is, because it shows you see the person, not just a face in the crowd. And that makes people feel good, like they matter.
Okay, you've convinced me. I'm going to start practicing this.
Right.
But what about those times when you need to convince someone of something? Like, how do we get people to see things our way?
Oh, good question.
Yeah.
Because that's where things can get tricky.
Especially if the other person has a totally different perspective.
Exactly. So Carnegie's next principle is all about winning people to your way of thinking. But his approach might surprise you.
How so?
He starts by asking this provocative question. Don't you have more faith in ideas you discover for yourself? Think about it. We all value our own insights more than those forced upon us.
Oh, totally. If someone tells me I have to do something, I immediately resist.
Right. It's human nature. So Carnegie says instead of dictating our opinions, we should subtly guide people towards a conclusion.
So it's like planting seeds of thought and letting them grow.
That's a great analogy. He tells a story about a sales manager, Adolph Seitz, who was tasked with turning around a struggling team.
Sales teams can be tough. What did he do?
Instead of coming in with a list of demands, he started by asking his team what they expected from him as a leader.
So he flipped the script.
He did. He wrote down their ideas on a blackboard, then asked what he could expect from them.
Like he was co-creating the solution with his team, getting their buy-in from the start.
Exactly. By making them feel heard and involved, he created a sense of ownership. And guess what happened?
Sales went up.
They skyrocketed.
That's amazing. Okay, I'm definitely going to try this with my team. But what about those times when you simply can't avoid a disagreement? How do you navigate that without damaging the relationship?
Carnegie has some wisdom for that, too. He says you should never tell someone they're wrong outright. That just shuts down the conversation.
It's like an instant defense mechanism.
Exactly. Instead, he suggests starting by finding common ground.
There's always something you can agree on,
Right,
even if it's small.
right. And from there, you can gently steer the conversation towards your perspective, focusing on the benefits for the other person.
So it's about building bridges, not walls.
And here's another key point. If you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
That's a tough one. Our egos don't like to admit defeat.
I know. But owning up to your mistakes can actually disarm the other person and build trust,
It shows you're not afraid to be vulnerable.
and that you value honesty over being right.
It's a good reminder that influence isn't about winning every argument. It's about achieving a positive outcome.
Exactly. And sometimes that means letting go of the need to be right all the time.
So we've covered a lot about how to interact with others on a personal level. But what about leadership? Does Carnegie have any advice on how to become a more effective leader?
Oh, absolutely. He devotes a significant chunk of the book to the art of leadership. And he frames it not as a position of power, but as a skill of influencing others effectively.
I love that. Because leadership isn't about bossing people around. It's about inspiring them to follow you.
And Carnegie's advice on how to do that is incredibly insightful.
Okay, I'm ready to learn from the master.
Yeah.
Hit me with his best leadership tips.
All right, ready to dive into some leadership secrets?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all ears.
Okay, so Carnegie kicks off this section with a principle he calls be a leader, how to change people without giving offense or arising resentment.
I love how straightforward that is. So many people struggle with how to lead effectively. What's the first principle he lays out?
Well, he starts with this kind of unexpected anecdote about President Calvin Coolidge. Remember him?
Silent Cal.
Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't he known for being a man of few words?
That's him. But one day, someone overheard him complimenting his secretary's dress and appearance.
Interesting. I guess even the strong, silent types know the power of a good compliment.
Right. And whether this was Coolidge being genuinely charming or something more calculated, Carnegie uses this to highlight the importance of beginning with praise.
It's like that spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down.
Exactly. And he contrasts this with a letter Lincoln wrote to General Hooker during the Civil War.
Well, this is when Hooker was like openly critical of Lincoln's leadership, right?
Yep, tensions were high. But instead of firing back, Lincoln starts his letter by praising Hooker's military skills and dedication.
So smart. Acknowledge the good stuff first.
It's like disarming the other person before you deliver the tough message.
Because no one wants to feel like they're just being attacked.
Exactly. Lincoln understood that people are much more receptive to feedback when they feel seen and acknowledged.
It's a masterclass in tactful communication.
It really is. So leading with praise is essential, but what about when you have to address, mistakes or shortcomings?
That's the tough part.
It is, but Carnegie has a story about a mechanic who accidentally fueled a World War II plane with jet fuel instead of gasoline.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying.
Right. Imagine the consequences.
I can't even. Did the pilot realize before takeoff?
Thankfully, yes. The pilot, a guy named Hoover, noticed before anything disastrous happened. But instead of freaking out and blaming the mechanic, he shared a story about a mistake he made as a kid and how his dad had harshly criticized him for it.
So he used his own experience to connect with the mechanic.
Exactly. By showing empathy and admitting his own fallibility, he was able to offer guidance without making the mechanic feel worse.
It's about fostering a culture of learning, not blame.
Right. Mistakes happen. It's about how we respond to them that makes all the difference.
So powerful. Any other tips on how to approach mistakes constructively?
Oh, definitely. Carnegie suggests that leaders should always talk about their own mistakes before criticizing others. He actually admits that when his niece, Josephine, started working for him as his secretary, he was quick to criticize her errors.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
It is, but he realized he was being unfair. Josephine was young, she didn't have his years of experience, so he started being more patient, more understanding.
It's about recognizing that everyone is on their own learning curve.
Exactly. And his next principle builds on that. He says, no one likes to take orders. He shares an anecdote about Owen D. Young, a successful businessman who is known for never giving direct orders.
Never. Like, at all. How did that work?
Instead of commanding, he would offer suggestions, framing his requests as invitations for collaboration. Like, you might consider this, or do you think that would work?
So it's about creating a more collaborative environment.
Right, where everyone feels valued and respected.
That makes so much sense. People are way more likely to buy in if they feel like they have a say.
Absolutely. And he contrasts this with a story about a vocational school teacher who learned this lesson the hard way.
Okay, I have a feeling this involves a student and a parking violation.
You got it. The teacher's first reaction to a student blocking a shop entrance with his car was to yell at him to move it.
Oh no, that never goes well.
Nope. The student, of course, got defensive and argued back. But the next time it happened, the teacher just calmly asked the student if he'd mind moving his car as it was blocking access.
What a difference.
Right. Just by changing his approach, he got the desired outcome without any conflict.
It's so simple, but so effective. It's about appealing to people's sense of reason and responsibility, not their fear of authority.
Exactly. And that leads us to Carnegie's next principle. Let the other person save face.
Okay, I like that. It's about preserving people's dignity.
Right. It's about addressing mistakes or disagreements in a way that allows the other person to maintain their self-respect. He even uses the example of General Robert E. Lee after the disastrous defeat at Gettysburg.
That was a turning point in the war.
It was. And Lee, instead of blaming his generals or his troops, took full responsibility, saying, "All this has been my fault."
Wow. Taking ownership like that after such a huge loss.
It's incredible, right? But it also demonstrates true leadership. Even in defeat, Lee inspired loyalty and respect by protecting the dignity of his men.
That's a powerful example. It's not about avoiding accountability, it's about handling it with grace and humility.
Exactly. And then Carnegie dives into a principle that might seem obvious, but it's so important, especially in tense situations. Begin in a friendly way.
Oh, I can see how that would set the tone for a more productive conversation.
Right. He uses the example of a landlord dealing with a tenant who was threatening to break his lease. The landlord was understandably upset.
Breaking a lease can be a huge headache.
It can be. But instead of getting angry, the landlord acknowledged the tenant's desire to move and then calmly explained the terms of the lease and the potential consequences of breaking it.
So he kept a cool head and focused on the facts.
Exactly. And it worked.
You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, right?
And speaking of things I love, this next principle is one of my favorites.
Okay, lay it on me.
Let the other person do a great deal of the talking.
Yes, this is my jam. I'm a much better listener than a talker.
Well, you're in good company. Carnegie points out that most people are more interested in talking about themselves than listening to others. He even tells this funny story about how he once went to a bridge party and ended up sitting next to a woman who didn't play. She was very chatty, and he just let her talk the whole time.
I bet she loved that.
She did. Later, she told someone that he was the most interesting conversationalist she'd ever met.
That's hilarious. He had barely said a word.
It just goes to show how powerful simply listening can be. We all crave feeling heard and understood.
Okay, that's a good reminder. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just shut up and listen.
And that leads perfectly into Carnegie's next principle. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers.
Ah, the power of ownership. I've seen this in action. If someone feels like they came up with the idea themselves, they're way more likely to be on board.
Exactly. Carnegie uses the example of a sales manager who was struggling to sell to a particular buyer. He finally realized he needed to stop pushing his ideas and start asking the buyer for his input.
So instead of trying to control the conversation, he created a more collaborative environment.
Exactly. By involving the buyer in the process, he was able to tailor his presentations to the buyer's specific needs and preferences.
It's about finding solutions together.
And that brings us to what might be the most challenging but also the most rewarding principle of all. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view.
This one is so hard. It's so easy to get stuck in our own heads and our own perspectives.
It is. But Carnegie is adamant that empathy is essential for truly influencing others.
Okay, but how do you actually do that?
He shares this great anecdote about a man who was always criticizing his wife for spending so much time tending their lawn. He thought she was wasting time. But when he finally tried to see things from her perspective, he realized that gardening brought her peace and joy.
It was her way to relax and connect with nature.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective changed everything. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about understanding and respecting each other's needs.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It's incredible how relevant Carnegie's principles are, even almost a century later.
I know, right? He really tapped into something timeless about human nature.
The biggest takeaway for me is that influence isn't about manipulation or control. It's about building genuine connections based on empathy, understanding, and respect.
I couldn't agree more. It's about approaching every interaction with the intention of creating a win-win.
So for all of you listening out there, we hope this deep dive into how to win friends and influence people has given you some practical tools for building stronger, more fulfilling relationships. What resonated most with you? What's one small change you can make today to start applying these ideas in your own life? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, keep diving deep.